So what are the components of an interview guide? Regardless of the type of interview that you'll do, most interview guides have several key components. The first component is what's called a STEM question, and this is exactly what it sounds like. These are the questions that you ask in an interview, the questions that aim to understand what you want to know. But questions and the answers that come from your respondent may not exactly match up to what you want to know. So another element or tool in an interview guide is what's called a probe. Probes are short prompts that elicit more in-depth responses. We'll talk about probes in a minute, but to give you a sense, an example of a probe might be how, where, or give me an example. Another element of an interview guide, in addition to STEM questions and probes, is what's called a lead. A lead transitions the interview from one question to a next. And then it's important to remember that regardless of the mix of tools that you have in your interview guide, each element has a specific kind of impact on the interview. For example, if you have a set of strict questions, a set of STEM questions, you might want to have probes throughout the interview guide. In addition, if your interview guide covers 3 different key themes, you might want to insert leads at each transition point from one theme to the next. Let's begin with the first element of an interview guide, the STEM question. This is the basic form of an interview. A STEM question is best suited for questions that begin with how, why, or when. These are questions about description and reflection. One example might be, what challenges do you face at work? That's a what question, asking someone to list something. Another example might be, how did you first develop the idea? That's a how question, and invites someone to tell a story. Consider, though, what happens when you might want to know more information than the respondent answers in relationship to the STEM question. This is where probes come in handy. So probes are short prompts that elicit further ideas and details. Classic examples of probes include asking a respondent how, or what are some examples? You can also do it less in the form of a question and more in the form of a suggestion. Tell me more. Can you give me an example? Probes are handy to have at any moment in an interview where you think that you're on track, but you'd like more information. They also help make the interview more comfortable and casual, even if it's more structured. In other words, probes are good for you because they help elicit more information, but they're also good for your respondent because they establish a relationship of comfort between the person who's asking the question and the person who's answering. The third element of an interview, regardless of its type, is what is called a lead. A lead is a type of probe. It's a probe that shifts the interview from one theme to a next. Say you've been discussing a topic X for 5 minutes, and it's time to shift to another topic, Y, because you're either running out of time or because you feel that you've learned enough about X and you want to go on to Y theme. Instead of asking simply out of the blue about Y theme, you can guide your respondent towards the idea that you're transitioning. So you can say, we've talked a little about X. Can you say more about Y? Or you can announce, we've covered ground around X. Now let's talk about Y. Leads can be formally built into your interview guide, which is to say you can write them out for yourself as reminders of times to transition, or they can be incorporated casually when you feel that it's appropriate. So in relationship to STEM questions, you might ask, what are better STEM questions? What makes a good STEM question? Well, let's take these 2 questions as an example and examine them for what their strengths might be. The first question here is, how does the protocol work? And the second question is, are you satisfied with the protocol? Consider the differences between these 2. In the first example, it's a how question. You're asking your respondent to describe something that you don't know, how the protocol works. In the second example, by contrast, you're asking your respondent if they're satisfied with the protocol. It is a question that can only be answered in detail with yes or no. We call the first question an open question. It elicits descriptive, reflective responses. We call the second question, a yes-no question, a more closed question. Now, it's not the issue that open questions are always good and closed questions are always bad in terms of the type of STEM question. It's more an issue of what is best suited for your needs. So in developing an interview guide, for every STEM question that you have, ask yourself, do I want a yes or no answer, or do I want a more descriptive answer? If you want something that is either affirmative or negative, a closed question might be more appropriate. If you want detail, description, narration, and analysis, an open question is more appropriate. Let's take a look at another two questions. The first question asks, wouldn't you agree that it takes too long to get service here? The second question asks, what is working and what's not working in terms of wait times? What do you think are some of the differences between these two questions? Let's look at the first one. The first question asks your respondent to agree with your own hypothesis. Wouldn't you agree? It's very difficult to say no to a question like this. It is a type of yes or no question, but importantly, it also asks your respondent to confirm something that you already know. You might need that for your interview purposes, but it also may be the case that asking someone to reconfirm what you already know closes off the possibility to be educated about something that you don't. So by contrast, let's look at the second question. What is working and what's not working in terms of wait times? In this question, there's no assumption from the interviewer. There's no demand that the respondent confirm what the interviewer already knows. Instead, this is a more open-ended question that asks your respondent to educate you on what they know and what you do not. We call the first question, one that begins with, wouldn't you agree? A leading question. It leads the respondent to reiterate your hypothesis as the interviewer, your supposition, and your assumptions. This might be good for confirming a hunch, but it is not so powerful in terms of getting details. We call the second question, this type of more open-ended question, not leading. It does not lead the respondent to confirm anything that you might know. Instead, it allows the respondent to explain things on their own terms.